All right, welcome to the Young Turks. I'm your host, Cenk Uygur. Wait a minute, we're going old school. We're going back in time here, and we're going forward. So back to the future. So I'm doing the show solo, at least in the first hour today, like we used to do back in the day. We're doing 3 hours instead of 2 hours today. In fact, oh no, we're doing 3 hours going forward from now on. We'll be doing a lot more guests. In fact, I've got some great guests for you guys in this show. And I want to tell you all about it. So the way that the shows are going to go from now on is we'll do the regular first 2 hours like we always do, 6 to 8 p.m. Then the third hour we'll have guests for the first half an hour, and this last half an hour will normally be for members only. Okay, and we'll cover some of the stories we didn't get to in the show, plus the personal stories we always do in the post game. So that's the new structure of the show. And today, we are not having a post game because we have some amazing guests for you guys. So who are they? Adam McKay. If you don't know him, wait till you get a load of this guy. So he has started several different things that you're familiar with: Upright Citizens Brigade, Funny or Die. He's co-written the Will Ferrell movies, The Other Guys, Anchorman, Anchorman 2. The list goes on and on. He just wrote, directed, and produced Vice. That's the movie about Dick Cheney. He won an Academy Award for The Big Short. Anyway, amazing and an amazing progressive. Okay, so he's here on the program a little bit later. And then a guy you might be familiar with, Bernie Sanders on the Young Turks, to launch our the relaunch in a sense of our 3 hour show. And yes, we're doing all this because it is in fact our 17th anniversary, which is a little stunning. I cannot believe we've been around for 17 years. So we've been online for 14 years, online video for 14 years, but we started in my living room on Sirius satellite radio. We'd shoot the show in there, such as it was. It was obviously just a radio show, an audio show, and we'd send it over to New York in little CDs back in the day. Okay, that's how old we are. Longest running show on the internet. That's a hell of a thing. So thank you for being here with us and here for the ride. It's been an amazing one, and hopefully we go another 17 years. I remember when we did the 1 billion view party at YouTube, and I said, I hope we get, we're back for a second billion, or maybe, dare I say, 10 billion. Sorry, already passed 10 billion. Okay, we barely even noted it. So, and it's all due to you guys. We had no resources, we had nothing but you guys. So if you hadn't watched, this certainly would not have worked. So the strength of this show isn't about us, it's about you. And that's why we call ourselves Home Progressives, and celebrate that we are exactly that. Okay, one last thing for you guys. That's since it is also happens to be Valentine's Day, here's our little Valentine's gift to you guys, 20% off at shoptyt.com. It's Sutton, we're having fun, okay? So check out shoptyt.com for 20% off. Look at that, it's in red. That's very sweet. Okay, now I've got amazing stories for you guys in the first hour today, including Andrew McCabe and so many others that are in the news, and should Trump be removed for being mentally unstable? So we'll have that conversation in a second. And then later in the second hour, business goes bankrupt by betting against Colin Kaepernick. Free market, it's a bitch. All right, so that's fun for everybody. Okay, so let's get started. Let's start with another old friend, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. So, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, where am I going? Here, really? Fascinating, I should have been told that. It's been a while, we're a little rusty doing hour one by ourselves. Okay, by ourselves. Me and Edwin here in the studio, okay. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was recently asked about marijuana and whether it was okay for politicians and specifically the president to smoke marijuana. Interesting. Okay, in this case, it was unfortunately TMZ. I'm still not happy with their work given how much they've supported Trump, etc. But fair questions here and fair answers. So first, is it okay to smoke weed overall? Let's get an answer on that.
We just need to accept that there is nothing more inherently damaging about marijuana than say legal substances like alcohol or anything else.
Okay, so for a lot of us that's elementary. But for a lot of Washington, this is controversial. So it's like a big deal when Kamala Harris said, it came out and said, no, I used to smoke weed when I was in college. I'm half Jamaican. She's obviously a senator from California running for president. Okay. She still prosecuted people who smoke marijuana, but that's a whole nother story. But hey, we're making progress. We're making progress. It's taken all this time for a lot of those politicians to move forward. But for a new generation like Ocasio-Cortez, it's elementary. Yeah, okay, wow. Are you sure you're all right if you smoked a joint? Well, how many beers did you have? But the next question is, should a sitting president be able to smoke weed? Let's see.
So, Senator, would it be okay to have a president who say that they do smoke?
I don't care.
It's not.
Yeah, I don't care. It's fine with me. You're not hurting anybody,
Right. Because there's really no difference between that and alcohol.
There are plenty of people who drink. They'll go out to happy hour. They'll go out, have 1, 2, 3.
Right. And I know everybody's been.
How is that different from anything else?
I'm amused that this, of course, stirred controversy. A sitting president, what if he or she was high? Well, what if they were drunk? And that's only happened about a couple of thousand times, probably more in the history. Ulysses Grant was well known to be a very, very heavy drinker. Lyndon Johnson, heavy drinker. Richard Nixon, preposterous drinker. Okay, so now some of those guys, not great presidents. Some of them did some wonderful things, but the idea that a president might be impaired at some point, no, say it ain't so. Yes, they do need a little bit of leisure time. And apparently for Trump, also executive time on top of that. Anyway, so should they be allowed to smoke a joint, and should we care? First of all, right now they can't, because the federal law says marijuana is the most dangerous controlled substance there is. It's a Schedule I drug. So theoretically, you'd have to arrest the president if he or she was smoking marijuana. But that's preposterous. Of course it's like beer. And like the prohibition on alcohol, it has caused gangs and violence, and the prohibition is a bigger problem than alcohol was in the first place. Alcohol, of course, is much more dangerous than marijuana. It leads to far more drunk driving accidents, let alone alcoholism, let alone the deaths that alcohol causes just from alcoholism, whereas no one has ever died from marijuana. So I think for a new generation, like I said, those answers seem to be obvious. But for the older folks, go ahead and prepare to get rattled by yet another Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez answer. Okay, one last thing that's just fun. The person next to her the whole time is Shoykat Chakrabarti. You might have seen him on the show before. He's one of the co-founders of the Just Democrats, and then he's now AOC's chief of staff. He's in almost every picture, and no one else will notice, but you Young Turks viewers probably will and should going forward. And he was phenomenal in both her campaign and with Just Democrats overall. And I'm always amused to see him right there. Nobody ever asked him anything, well, from time to time. But he was also instrumental in not only AOC's win, but so many other Just Democrats like Rashida Tlaib and many, many others. So, and everybody knows that there's no party like a Chakrabarti. So we're keeping it real here on the Young Turks. All right, keep going, AOC. All right, now, I think there ain't no party like a Chakrabarti. But anyways, forward. One more AOC story for you guys, because she's causing a ruckus. So Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez comes out of a hearing and notices homeless people in the hallways of Congress. And she thinks, well, is there a protest going on? Let me check this thing out. And it turns out, no, there's no protest. And she discovered something that has been going on for quite some time, but nobody ever talks about. And as usual, she pulled back the curtain and showed us what's actually happening in Congress. So let me show you her first tweet here. So she takes a picture of those folks lined up and says, shocked as a beginning to cover it. Today I left a hearing on homelessness and saw tons of people camped outside committee. I turned to my staff and asked if it was a demonstration. No, they said, lobbyists pay the homeless and others to hold their place so they can get in first. Amazing. Okay, now let me show you her second tweet and then we'll explain the phenomenon. She said, apparently this is a normal practice and people don't bat an eye. The first few people in line are guaranteed at least a seat in a given hearing. This was the hearing for marijuana banking laws. Lobbyists and those who can afford it pay people to hold their spot so they could get in first. So now, she came out of a different committee hearing. Let me tell you about that, and you will enjoy this irony. Ocasio-Cortez snapped a photo on her way out of a hearing to discuss a draft piece of legislation called the Ending Homelessness Act of 2019. So she comes out of that committee talking about this piece of legislation to end homelessness, and she's greeted by all these homeless people in Congress. And then she asks about it and gets these answers. So this has apparently been going on for quite some time, and we found an article from 2009 that once talked about this, and they explain why they do this, and there's another layer of irony here. They say that the seats are valuable to lobbyists because the hearing is often their only face time with legislators. So the legislators are going, the lobbyists are going there to influence the legislators, but they don't want to wait. And sometimes the wait takes a long time. And in fact, a lot of people want to get into these hearings because they also want to make sure that the legislators see them. A lot of them are activists. And so there's a whole range. And there would be nothing wrong with an activist going in and a lobbyist going in, et cetera, if everybody waited their turn. In fact, Caitlin Pruss, a fellow at the internet environmental group Avaz.org, and her group of cheering green t-shirt environmentalists were shut out of a hearing, as they explained in that earlier article. And so that happens all the time. So the lobbyists figured out, I don't want to wait here. And a lot of these activists wait here for 5-6 hours. All right, you know what? I'm gonna hire someone and I'm gonna make them wait even longer, sometimes overnight. Now they actually pay okay, $11 to $35 an hour, which I was kind of stunned by. So that's the small piece of good news, but otherwise, what do? So here comes the final irony. They use the homeless to wait for them. Then the lobbyists come in to influence the politicians on behalf of the rich to redistribute the wealth to the top. So how is that for callous? And Washington explained in one simple phenomenon. There it is in a nutshell. Who do I need to use here to make sure that the people giving me money, the people who are already incredibly wealthy and powerful, and the corporations that are wealthy and powerful, so I can go lobby the legislators to make sure that they get all of the benefits. And if there wasn't activists on behalf of the homeless, they might not be able to make it into a committee hearing on the homeless because the homeless would be holding seats for the lobbyists. Gee, I wonder why people are sickened by Washington, D.C. And so when AOC reveals these things, people celebrate her for it because she's a rare politician who's being honest about what's happening there. And that is the swamp, that is the corruption that she's exposing. She doesn't take any corporate PAC money like all the Just Democrats, so she doesn't have to worry about those lobbyists. She doesn't have to wait for their donations. She doesn't have to curry favor with those lobbyists. So she is free to tell us what's actually happening. By the way, if you like that, there's a lot more where that came from. It's because the Just Democrats are at it again. They're accepting nominations. They found Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez through a nomination. It's a really great story, actually, that some of the founders of the Just Democrats and the current leaders of that group told on a post game here for our members, tyt.com/join, to become a member and get that post game and find out who nominated AOC in the first place. But right now they're doing it again. So go to justicedemocrats.com/nominate and nominate someone in your neck of the woods, and they take that incredibly seriously. They want you guys, instead of some lobbyists or consultants, to help find the best candidates, and obviously have a pretty good track record at that. And then since they don't take corporate PAC money, justdemocrats.com/donate to make sure that candidates like Ocasio-Cortez can win, as she did in this cycle, and for all the new ones. And hopefully we'll have a dozen more, and maybe even bigger than that in the next Congress. So imagine the difference that could make. So go participate. You can make all the difference in the world. Okay, now I got one more story for you guys in this segment, and that has to do with coal. So Donald Trump ran out of coal. I remember being at the Republican National Convention and almost every speech mentioned coal. It was a bit bizarre. It's actually now a very small industry. The solar industry in this country is much larger, but is almost never talked about by Republicans. And it's this obsession with coal. And the reason for that is it's more of an emotional connection. It's also a little bit of corruption sprinkled in, as you'll see at the end of this story. But the emotional connection is, oh, we're gonna make America like it used to be back in the 1950s. Does that mean a 91% marginal tax rate for the rich? No. It means like, oh, like coal, and remember when we had miners and they do blue collar guys going into the mines and risking their lives so that other people can make incredible amounts of money. So they talked about that. Now, did they have a plan to fix things and to bring coal back? Of course not, it's Donald Trump. He never has a plan for anything. He's never thought 1 minute ahead. So if he had a brilliant plan for saving the jobs in coal industry, it hadn't worked. And so today, another giant coal plant shutting down. Federal Utility Board voted Thursday to close a coal-fired power plant in Kentucky, despite objections from President Donald Trump and US Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, in a move the board says will save its more than 10 million customers $320 million. So Trump and McConnell apparently saying, no, don't save them $320 million. We don't want to do that. Why? Well, we built up this thing that we couldn't possibly deliver on, and it's gonna be embarrassing. Plus, again, like I said, there's a little bit of corruption mixed in here. So don't do that, even though it would save the taxpayers money and it would save customers money, it would save everybody money. Don't do it, doesn't matter. Even though the people on the board here that decided it were mainly Trump appointees. The majority of them were Trump appointees. With the lone vote of voting no, the rest of them voted yes to close down the plant. So the math was overwhelming, the evidence was clear, and they had to go in that direction. By the way, the one guy who voted no was a former coal executive. Of course. So one of the plants being shut down is quite famous, actually. It was in a song. Let me tell you about that. The decision continues, they say at Talking Points memo. The TVA's, that's the Tennessee Valley Authority's trend of retiring its aging coal-fired power plants in favor of cheaper and cleaner energy sources, including natural gas. At one time, Muhlenberg County was the nation's top coal producer, inspiring folk singer John Prine to pen his 1971 standard, Paradise. And well, it's apparently Paradise Lost. That's the second Paradise that Donald Trump has lost on his watch. Paradise, California burnt down. Now Paradise, the coal power plant, is being shut down because it never made any sense in the first place, especially in these times. And Donald Trump never had a plan to rescue them. It was just political tricks to try to get votes. He never meant any of it. And as the CEO of the Tennessee Valley Authority explains, Bill Johnson, says it's not about coal. The decision is about economics. It's about keeping rates as low as feasible. I believe they used to have a term for that called free market capitalism that the conservatives used to celebrate. But now if it's renewable energy that's doing well and costless, I don't want renewable energy. That would save the planet. We don't want that. We want the terrible fossil fuel energy that melts the planet. God damn it, free market. Okay, how's that for irony? Okay, finally, we get to the corruption. You're gonna be shocked by this, I hope you're sitting. Suppliers of the plant include a mine owned by one of Trump's campaign donors. Of course. So, look, times are changing. There are actually a lot of jobs being created in renewable energy, solar, wind, etc. And let's be smart. Let's stop lying to people, telling them that we're gonna save old industries that we cannot save, that are economically not feasible. And instead, let's work to make sure that they get jobs in new industries, including renewable energy. That would be the honest way to go about things. And of course, if you're Trump, you don't wanna go in that direction. You wanna look out for your donors and lie to your voters. Well, reality has a way of catching up with you, and it just did today. All right, we're gonna take a quick break. When we come back, we've got a lot of great stories, including some dramatic news from today, so don't miss it. We'll be right back. We hope you're enjoying this free clip from the Young Turks. If you wanna get the whole show and more exclusive content while supporting independent media, Become a member at tyt.com/join today. In the meantime, enjoy this free segment. All right, back on the Young Turks, let me read a couple comments for you guys. Mickey C from the member section writes in, 70-year-old woman here, and you'd be surprised how many in my generation still smoke. You young kids didn't invent it. I love your attitude. Good on you, Mickey. All right, light one for me. Blurple says, I hope that the Republican voters that lost jobs have good memories. Well, we might find out in 2020. Omega Cats writes in on Twitter, I'd take a president who smokes some pot to unwind and is honest about it over one that snorts a handful of Adderall anytime he has to actually do work and yet pretends to be righteously unadulterated any day of the week. Now, I don't know who we might be talking about, okay? There are some rumors about a certain orange president though. Okay, Jeremy Emery, 1984, writes in, AOC is that little drop of water that turns it into a wave in the sea. She's too strong for DC, and she's getting the job done. I can't help but read one more tweet. Mi Papito writes in, what if the president was high? Like asking the question, and says, yeah, but what if the president was dumb? That's a story we're gonna get to a little bit later too. Peter Hamby from YouTube Super Chat says, happy Valentine's Day 17th anniversary to the TYT crew and all the progressives. Hopefully everyone is loved, no doubt more than I am. Hashtag still single, hashtag loneliness. Peter, hang in there, brother. Hang in there, we're all doing this together, all right? You're part of the show too. All right, now I have an amazing story for you guys. Let's go over here. Okay. This is some of my favorite stories. It is the science of our brains and how it leads us to our political opinions. Now, is this the only factor? Of course not. There's always a number of factors to be considered in figuring out why people act the way they do, and in this case, vote the way they do, and choose their particular ideology. But there are some amazing findings in science about how the conservative mind works as opposed to the liberal mind. And so we've told you about some of this before, and fear has a huge role to play. But now there's a new twist and a number of studies talking about a different emotion that might make all the difference in the world, and that is disgust. All right, before I get to that though, I want to remind you of some of the work that we've highlighted in the past. So for example, John Hibbing and Kevin Smith at the University of Nebraska at Lincoln and John Alford at Rice University in Houston had done a study that concluded this. Compared with liberals, they'd previously found conservatives generally pay more attention and react more strongly to a broad array of threats. For example, they have more pronounced startle response to loud noises, and they gaze longer at photos of people displaying angry expressions. You know, look, that does seem to fit in fairly well with what we see with our own eyes, as you'll continue to see throughout this amazing story. You know, the conservatives fear easily. Here come the Muslims, oh my God. They passed an anti-Sharia law in Oklahoma. They're afraid the Muslims are going to take over Oklahoma. Do they frighten easily? Yes. Okay, then the Latinos are coming and et cetera, and then watch out for the gays and the transgender are going into your bathroom. And we'll talk about more of that as we go on as well. But let me give you more details. Using MRA, scientists from the University of College London have found that studies who identify themselves as conservatives have a larger amygdala than self-described liberals. This brain structure is involved in emotion processing and is especially reactive to fearful stimuli. It's possible that an oversized amygdala could create a heightened sensitivity that may cause one to habitually overreact to anything that appears to be a potential threat, whether it actually is one or not. Okay, now, so that is one part of the physiology of conservatives that are slightly different. Now, again, it doesn't apply to every conservative, and so I don't want people doing stereotypes overall, but I am sharing the science with you because it is fascinating. So it appears that on average, they have larger amygdalas, which is the fear center, okay? Now, we turn to the new studies on the issue of disgust. So a political scientist went to Reed Montague, who's a neuroscientist at Virginia Tech at the Human Neuroimaging Laboratory, and asked him to do some studies about mapping the brain and the reaction that conservatives and liberals have to the emotion of disgust, and how it might influence their political opinions. And the neuroscientist Montague was deeply skeptical. And then they did the studies and they found out amazing results. So let me share that with you. The brains of liberals and conservatives reacted in wildly different ways to repulsive pictures. Both groups reacted, but different brain networks were stimulated. Just by looking at the subject's neural responses, in fact, Montague could predict with more than 95% accuracy whether they were liberal or conservative. That's amazing. So based on how you react to images that are considered disgusting, we can tell with 95% certainty whether you're gonna be a conservative or a liberal. At least according to this one study, but there are a number of studies which I'm again going to share with you right now. The scientist said, quote, "I was completely flabbergasted by the predictability of the results." Okay, now let's talk about some of the other studies. Numerous studies have found that high levels of sensitivity to disgust tend to go hand in hand with, quote, "a conservative ethos." That ethos is defined by characteristics such as traditionalism, religiosity, support for authority and hierarchy, sexual conservatism, and distrust of outsiders. Now, the distrust of outsiders is perhaps one of the most important ones, but I also wanted to point out the other parts of it. See, I used to be a Republican, but I was a liberal Republican back when I was growing up. And I wondered, so is, which side do I fall on here? Because now obviously I'm very progressive. And I think that, and we've gone over this a lot in the show and in the post game for the members, et cetera, that I was always a progressive and I was misled into thinking that Republicans actually cared about balanced budgets and they did a wonderful job marketing about how they cared about small businesses, et cetera, et cetera. But when you look to see, how people react, that is where you can see the difference. And in my case, I never understood why you should listen to authority for authority's sake. And the conservative mind is structured differently. They do believe that, because to them, order is really important. And then in religion, there are these rules about cleanliness. Now, some of it is very logical. You don't want to get sick, and especially back in the day when those texts were written, that was even more relevant, and we didn't have modern science. But a lot of it seemed to be rules for the sake of rules. Well, hey, look, you got to make sure that your beard is a certain way, and this applies across many different religions. And to me, that seemed irrational. We live in the modern world where we have medicine, and the size of our beard is totally irrelevant. Whether we cover our head or whether we eat bacon or drink alcohol is largely irrelevant to whether we actually protect ourselves from illness. These are obviously outdated rules, but for the conservative mind, they enjoy and need that order and hierarchy to make sure that they are safe. So, and protected from things that they feel they need protection from. So we'll get into that as well. Now, let me quote a couple of other scientists here. And by the way, this is a great story from Kathleen McAuliffe in The Atlantic that I'm quoting from. She explains, as Pizarro, Inbar, and the other authors of the study write in the Journal of Social, Psychological, and Personality Science, this result suggests that disgust sensitivity is related to conservatism across a wide variety of cultures, geographic regions, and political systems. So this isn't just about America, and it's certainly not just about Trump, but we will get to him at the end. It's about human nature, and this has been true throughout time and throughout different places. In fact, the study from Denmark, let's go to that. As the scientist there explains, disgust influences our political views as much as, or even more than long recognized factors such as education and income bracket. Now that's how political scientists normally conceive of it and have talked about it for most of my life. But now neuroscientists and others are beginning to realize, no, that our emotions make a bigger difference. Okay, and by the way, the scientists do not judge this. So they say, hey, look, maybe you can argue that conservatives, if you're then in the ideological realm, are being cautious and rightfully cautious. Or you could argue that they're being unduly afraid in these modern times. That's a decision for you to make. They're just telling you what the reality of our brains and other body parts are, because it turns out the tongue is also really relevant. I know, this is mind-blowing, it's fascinating, that's why I love the story, I wanted to share it with you. Okay, so now let's go back to the main study that we were talking about in regards to Montague. And McAuliffe quotes here: as we move about in the world, a sizable volume of research shows our minds are constantly searching our surroundings for contaminants, moldy leftovers, garbage spilling out of trash cans, a leaky sewage pipe. And when their brain detects them, it triggers sudden feelings of revulsion. Confronted, we withdraw from the threat. The mechanism is part of what's known as the behavioral immune system, and it is as vital for survival as the fight or flight response. So understand that, first of all, that all humans have this. The question is the degree to which you have it. So as I discovered later in life, I don't have it to a large degree. It turns out I was progressive all along. That's part of why I left the Republican Party, also why I left religion. And everybody also has culture that influences them. So if you grow up in a particularly conservative area, you might be taught to be a Republican or conservative, to which, to some degree, that's what applied to me. But then you get to your natural self as you evolve if you have an open mind, right? And obviously influenced by all these factors that you might not even be aware of. So let's keep going. They say some scientists, notably the psychologist Corey Fincher at the University of Warwick in England and the biologist Randy Thornhill at the University of New Mexico, theorized that foreigners, at least in the past, would have been more likely to expose local populations to pathogens against which they had no acquired defenses. And other scientists think germ fears piggyback on the negative stereotypes about foreigners common throughout history, the notion that they're dirty, eat bizarre foods, and have looser sexual mores. Now, this is also interesting because back in the day, there was a little bit of truth to that. Not that the foreigners were dirty, everybody was a foreigner, but they might carry pathogens that your local village was not familiar with, and that could spread disease quicker. But that original kernel of truth is, of course, enormously outdated now, but it has stuck in our DNA and in some of our brains. Actually, all of our brains, but again, to what degree is the question at hand. And so, and politically, that has gone through all of these different generations. And that fear of the others, the fear of the foreigner, the fear of disease is used by conservative politicians to trigger conservative voters into voting in a certain direction because of that fear and disgust that is created in their brains. So more on this. More recent investigations by Peterson and Aora suggest that those with high disgust sensitivity tend to be leery of any stranger, not just foreigners. They view casual social acquaintances with a certain amount of suspicion. A robust finding replicated across 3 studies with a total of 4,400 participants showed. The implication is clear. Disgust and distrust are somehow linked. And you can see that in the politicians throughout your lifetime. Watch out for the immigrants coming in. One of Steve Bannon and a lot of the right wing's favorite books is one that came out of France. And it's I believe, The Camp of the Saints. And it talks about how there's a boat full of South Asian immigrants coming to Europe, and they carry disease with them, and they have loose sexual customs, and they're having orgies nonstop, and then they eat their own feces and these disgusting things. I mean, it's word for word designed for the conservative mind. Watch out for feces, disgust. There's the sexual issues that again bring out the disgust of foreigners with disease. I mean, it is meant to trigger people, and it did. It triggered Steve Bannon, Steve Miller, and so many others. And unfortunately, they have taken over the body politic here in America, and obviously mainly in the form of Donald Trump. And again, we'll get to him at the end. So here's one of the studies that in particular, and I want you to get a sense of how they did this study and the results from it. And again, every part of this is amazing. Another experiment involved 2 groups of subjects with similar political ideologies. One group was exposed to a vomit-like scent as the subjects filled out an inventory of their social values. The other group filled out the inventory in an odorless setting. Those in the first group expressed more opposition to gay rights, pornography, and premarital sex than those in the second group. The future sent even inspired significantly more agreement with biblical truth. Okay, so there's a second part of the story, but think about that. So that's not separating conservatives and liberals. That's an average set of people that involves conservatives, liberals, everybody else, right? But when you subject them to something that we generally think of as disgusting, like a vomit-like smell, they become more conservative. They become more against gay rights, pornography. They become more religious. I need order. I need this disgust to stop. And that is all subconscious. Nobody's consciously thinking about it. That's why part of why this is so amazing. Let's go to the second part of the study. Variations on these studies using, and this is funny but true, fart spray, foul taste, and other creative disgust elicitors reveal a consistent pattern. When we experience disgust, we tend to make harsher moral judgments. Okay, wow. Now we get to tongues. Okay, get a load of this. Just when you thought this couldn't get any more amazing. It turns out the taste receptors in our mouths are structured a little differently, and they make a huge difference in our psychology as well. So let me tell you more about that. Taste receptors, they knew, are concentrated in fungiform papillae. Sorry if I'm saying that wrong. Those spongy little bumps on your tongue. The greater the density of papillae, the more acute your taste, okay? So the more of those bumps you have, the more acute your taste is. So what does that lead to? The degree to which subjects' views tilted to the right was, they found, in direct proportion to the density of papillae on their tongue. So they would give people substances that tasted a little bitter, and now bitter is somewhat associated with things that might be toxic, like leftover milk, etc. That's your body saying, reject this, right? So people with more sensitive tongues reacted more to the bitter taste, and it turns out they are more conservative. They are more prone to get triggered by disgust, and first of all, to literally sense disgust and then be triggered by it. I don't know if you guys are as amazed as I am, but I love science. And again, do not judge people purely based on this, okay? But it's just for your edification, and it does seem to, at least explain some of the things that we see politically in our world. Now, does this make people a little bit easier to manipulate? Unfortunately, the answer is yes. So David Pizarro, a psychology professor that I quoted earlier, explains, it's such a low level, almost non-cognitive emotion that you really aren't thinking that much about it. So it's non-cognitive, meaning, again, you're not consciously thinking, oh, I taste something disgusting or I smell something disgusting, that's gonna make me more, so of course you're not consciously thinking that. It's non-cognitive in that sense. He explains that emotion is more reflexive than reflective. There's a saying that a conservative uses, facts don't care about your emotions. It turns out your emotions don't care about facts, especially if you're a conservative. And then one more from Pizarro, he says, that is the rhetorical strength of disgust. It's a little hack. You hack into brains pretty quickly and easily by making them feel disgust, bypassing logic and reason to sway judgment. Now, let me show you real world examples. That's the science. Now, have right-wing demagogues used this in the past? Oh, and you know they have. But I want to remind you of some specific examples. We'll go to the most extreme, and that's Nazi propaganda. And this is from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum website. They explain that in that propaganda, Jews were often described as an alien race that fed off the host nation and poisoned its culture. Now, the Holocaust Memorial Museum has no connection to those scientists. They wrote this stuff before any of these studies were even done, let alone published. And so those two things are not connected. But instinctually, those right-wing demagogues, they knew it. They knew that there is something that if you say that the other is filled with disease, is an alien, and it's infecting us, it would cause disgust and hatred and enough demagoguery to target those people that they had chosen to victimize. More from that. The Jews were not the only group excluded from the vision of the, quote, national community. Propaganda helped to define who would be excluded from the new society and justified measures against the outsiders. You see familiar themes here. These so-called outsiders included Jews, Roma, homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, and Germans viewed as genetically inferior and harmful to, quote, the national health. Hey, it's disease, it's an infection, it's a virus. You must reject it from your body politic. And obviously that led to horrible, horrible results. But let me give you one last one that is even more clear. These scenes, again, this is the Holocaust Memorial Museum describing this. These scenes compare Jews to rats that carry contagion, flood the continent, and devour precious resources. It's almost as if the Nazis read the scientific literature and decided to use it to manipulate the masses. Of course, they didn't at the time, but they knew it in their bones. So now we come to modern day America. Just a couple of quick ones. We could do this all day long. But listen to the language that Donald Trump uses when describing immigrants. He says, you wouldn't believe how bad these people are. These aren't people, these are animals. And we're taking them out of the country at a level and at a rate that's never happened before. Back in the day, these people are rats, they're outsiders, they're damaging the national health. These days, these people are animals, they're outsiders, and they're damaging us, and we're rejecting them from our national community to protect ourselves. And if that wasn't clear enough, he also sent this tweet. Democrats are the problem, Trump said. They don't care about crime and want illegal immigrants, no matter how bad they may be, to pour into and infest our country. So that is not an accident. And he knows that that triggers that emotion of disgust. He might not know the science because he can't read past one page, but he's seen it in the reaction in the crowds. He's seen it in the way that Republicans give him feedback. So when he talks about animals, the outsiders, the foreigners, we have to ban all the Muslims. We have to build a wall to protect ourselves from the foreign invaders who will infest us. Infest us. He is doing a tradition that unfortunately goes back a long, long time in conservative politics, and that is built to trigger the conservative brain, to get people to reject outsiders, foreigners, and people that they consider the others. I'm hoping now that you know that, and please tell others, spread this video or the articles, and we'll have the link to the article below. This is great work. Because knowledge might, just might, be able to overcome what is going on in the back of our heads without us being aware of it. So at least now we know the phenomenons that are part of what causes the political ideology that you see in your world. All right, we got to take a quick break. When we come back, we got more amazing news for you guys. We'll come right back.